Thing goes wrong.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Ward, and I'm the Vice President of the NATO Association of Canada, or the NAOC. We are a charitable, not NGO, dedicated to informing Canadians about the importance of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. While NATO may not often come to mind in the daily lives of Canadians, its contribution to transatlantic peace, prosperity, and security are fundamental to our way of life. At the heart of NATO is the principle of collective defense. That's the understanding that an attack on one member is an attack on all members. This principle, forged in the wake of the Second World War, remains a cornerstone of Western stability, underscoring the power of unity to defer conflict. We at the NATO Association are committed to fostering informed conversations about these issues. We invite you to engage with us as part of our community. You can connect with us through Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. I also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with future events and discussions. Today, we are honored to welcome a distinguished guest, His Excellency Carlos Arturo Morales López, the Ambassador of Colombia to Canada. Colombia has the distinction of being a global partner of NATO, making it the first and only Latin American country to hold this status. I now pass the floor to Elena, Rihanna, and Tristan, members of our NATO Association and team, to formally introduce the ambassador.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your kind introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our diplomatic speaker series, exploring Canada's relations with its NATO allies and global partners in a challenging security environment. My name is Elena Krashenivska, and I'm a senior editor at the NATO Association of Canada.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Rihanna Elkasum, and I'm a social media coordinator at NATO Association of Canada.
And I'm Tristan Price. I'm a engagement coordinator at the NATO Association of Canada.
We are honored to be joined today by His Excellency Carlos Arturo Morales López, the Ambassador of Colombia to Canada. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. As NATO's only global partner in South America, Colombia plays a unique role in transatlantic security. This discussion will provide key insight into the evolving partnership between NATO and Colombia, regional defense strategies, and the future of security cooperation in the Americas. Before we begin with the ambassador's opening statements, I would like to briefly go over his bio for our audience. Carlos Arturo Morales López was appointed as Colombia's ambassador to Canada in March 2023. He is a lawyer from Universidad Libre of Colombia. During his 39 years in the Foreign Service, he has held, among others, the following positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Abroad: Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs, Chief of Staff of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador of Colombia to the State of Israel, Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Director of the Americas, Deputy Chief of Protocol, Minister Counselor at the Embassy of Colombia in the United States of America, Acting Head of Mission in Denmark, and First Secretary at the Embassy in Japan. Ambassador, we invite you to begin with some opening remarks before we proceed to the questions.
Good afternoon again, and thank you so much to the NATO Organization of Canada for this invitation. I'm very, very pleased to have this session with you, and just my greetings to Mr. Mike Ward, Vice President of the NATO Association, Olena Krashenivska, Rihanna Alkosum, and Tristan Price for being our host today. I'm very proud, to be with you today and to present in some way, our special bonds that we share Colombia as a global partner of NATO. It was last week I had a chance to give in some lecture at the University of Carleton about the Colombia's situation and foreign policy. And when I mentioned about our a strong relation with NATO, many people were surprised about what Colombia is in that organization, because NATO is considered, a transatlantic organization, but countries, but not for Latin American ones. We are members or other mechanisms of integration, economic integration, political dialogue, but not in NATO. So it was quite surprise for many of the audience to know that Colombia was the only Latin American partner, global partner of NATO. Let me say, starting that Colombia, for just as a basic fact, is a country located in the northwestern part of the South America, with coast in the Caribbean or the Atlantic Ocean, and also in the Pacific, with also Andean country, because the Andean range came into Colombia in the south from Ecuador and divided into the territory in 3 branches, and also bordering eastern plains with Venezuela, and also the Amazon region. That's why, Colombia is considered like 5 countries in one. Amazon country, Andean country, Pacific country, Caribbean country, and also an important country as a partner that is historically Venezuela. So we have, like I mentioned, 5 countries in one, with that implies that we have many diversity in terms of topography, in terms of our cultural roots, expressions in music, in arts, in everything. So that diversity brings me also the idea that Canada and Colombia shares in some way so many common aspects and common grounds in terms of we have also our aborigines that you call here First Nations, and this is a country with a multiple and diverse expressions. Through more than 2 centuries of the Republican life, Colombia has demonstrated remarkable capacity for adaptations and resilience, overcoming challenges and transformations. After independence from Spain, we embarked in our independent life with many challenges. But one of the things that I want to remark here is how is the resilience of our institutions. We have been enjoying democratic institutionality for almost more than 200 years, with just interruption of military rule for 4 years. But I think this is one of the oldest democratic countries in the hemisphere. So Colombia has remained in that path all the time, with strong institutions, with alternation of powers, elections every 4 years, with a system with check and balances, and also with the free press. That is also important for our civilian framework. So this is really a country that facing many challenges I mentioned. For example, the violence, that it was a general common denominator during the 20th century. But in 2016, we took the decision to sign a peace agreement. That peace agreement, led us in order to start the implementation of peace building, and also to have a new Colombia in order to have more stability and more welfare and, of course, economic development for our people. So our relations and closer relations with NATO is that taking us to be today a global partner of the organization, the other partner in Latin America, as we mentioned here 5 minutes ago. Our cooperation with NATO dates back to 2008, when our Ministry of Defense started to exploring challenges of cooperation with NATO. And the motivation was really political and military, in order to raise the international standards of our armed forces, and also the expand of the network strategic allies in the projection of Colombia's capabilities abroad. So we found in NATO the great possibility to do that, but also to enhance a really military bonds in terms of good practices, how to NATO facing the humanitarian crisis, because it was not only related with military actions, but also the best practices, not only for abroad, but also internally in each country in terms of the professionalization, if I may I say this is term that is quite used in Spanish, but also to have a more a higher standard of capabilities of our armed forces. So we also start in 2013 when we signed with NATO the agreement for security and the exchange of classified information and cooperation in order to regulate procedures regarding the custody of information subject to exchange. And also in the relationship with NATO was the beginning of the Colombia's participation in the Building in Integrity program. So there are so many, areas where we can, and we started to have a very quite close relationship with NATO, and it was, I think, it's a complementary way in order to strengthen the bilateral relations that we have with many countries in Europe, also with the United States. That traditionally we have a really strong relation with the United States because we have received, of course, capacity building, and also in Canada, in the case of Canada, our relation is a privileged relations with Canada, United States, as I mentioned, and many other countries in Europe, particularly Spain. So in the NATO self-assessment questionnaire was carried out in Colombia, was placed in the second group, positioning itself among the best countries in terms of integrity and transparency. And one other aspects that I just want also to mention is the collaboration that took place in 2015 with the participation in Operation Ocean Shield. Our ocean patrol vessel 7 de Agosto, Colombia May, was sent off to the coast of Somalia to join a multilateral anti-piracy operation in September 2015. So there are so other things like in 2016, we signed the first individual partnership cooperation program, IPCP, that gave us the status of global partner of the organization. And also in 2019, we're also the International Demining Center that is very at the core of our armed forces and of the Colombian military forces, was accredited by NATO as part of the Partners Training and Education Center, being the 34th country worldwide. So in 2021, Colombia and NATO agree a new framework of cooperation, the individually tailored partnership program, and making the beginning of an even closer partnership. Colombia was the first partner to transition into this, which cover areas of enhanced cooperation, interoperability, building integrity, training, and education, of course. So our relation has maintained a constant and political and military dialogue that has allowed us to talk in different matters, including advances of capability, certification, and counterterrorism. On the other hand, we recently shared experience in the fight against terrorism with NATO through an online mobile training group, which is the Turkish Center of Excellence, and in other also aspects, the courses offered by NATO have enabled the military forces to achieve high military standards. In addition, Colombia was able to be part of the program for the improvement of military education, DEP, receiving training in teacher development, evaluation, and curriculum design. So finally, let me highlight that Colombia recently launched an action plan on women, peace, and security in compliance with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. And in line with this, in January 2025, Colombia endorsed the updated NATO's Women, Peace, and Security Policy, reaffirming its commitment to NATO, the United Nations, and in particular with the role of women in the armed forces. Let me just stop here, and this is just overview and general terms, how is now Colombia and the relationship with the NATO organization.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ambassador. So as you just mentioned, Colombia is the only Latin American country that has a NATO partner status, which is a significant distinction within the region. And you did just mention some of the motivations for Colombia to join, but if you did want to also elaborate on that and also possibly discuss some key areas of elaboration between Colombia and NATO partnership. Additionally, are there any tangible benefits that Colombia has gained from this partnership over the years that you're able to share? Thank you.
I think, as I mentioned during my introduction remarks, was in order to improve our capabilities, also to enhance our military knowledge for our armed forces, to increase the level of the capabilities, of course, but also to exchange information. That is also important for Colombia. As I mentioned, it was something that we could join more in a practical way, how to share specific issues related with peace and security, and also all those capacities of our armed forces, and increasingly professional military forces, how to comply with international standards, mostly in respect of human rights and international humanitarian law. I think this is one of also our motivations in some way of our goals, and we have been quite, lucky to enjoy this relationship with our relations with NATO. And also let me also mention that maybe for Colombia and NATO, peacekeeping is a priority. As I mentioned, we signed a peace agreement in 2016. We have a political mission by United Nations that is monitoring in Colombia the process, the implementation of the peace process in our country. And I think there are quite a lot of experiences in order to share with our counterparts, the countries on the NATO.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It's great to hear about the in-depth relationship even long before 2017 when Colombia became a partner. And just to follow up on that, beyond Colombia's cooperation with NATO, does Colombia play a role in encouraging broader engagement between NATO and other South American countries?
Yeah, do you know we are in a region that is traditionally a peaceful region for many decades. If you look, Latin America has not posed any threat in terms of international security. We have, of course, some kind of differences, maybe in territorial disputes among our countries after the independence from Spain, but we have, the will and also our capacity to solve through the diplomatic instruments and tools in order to solve our differences. But in general terms, this is a peaceful region, but it doesn't mean that we are facing quite a lot of threats, international threats like terrorism, like the drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and now are looking for example, external or extracontinental migration represents also a big threat, also not only for the Latin American region, but also for the whole hemisphere. So I think it's important to know that even we are in Latin America, Colombia is a country with as I mentioned, with a long tradition of relationship bilaterally with many members of the NATO. We found in the organization the way in order to enhance better that relationship. It doesn't mean, because it depends from any state, and we understand that it depends also from the political scenario, that countries decide whether you have or you strengthen your relation with any organization with another country. It depends, the political scenario in that moment. But we consider that we are in the capacity to show to other Latin American countries that this relation with NATO is a fruitful relations in terms of the issues that we mentioned for professionalization of our armed forces, exchange of experiences, good practices, and also to exchange information in issues and threats that are facing right now as the region as a whole. And also, but we have to have in mind also that the final decision ultimately lies or depends from the organization itself.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So when we're talking about increasing capacities for Colombia and also having a complementary relationship with NATO countries, Colombia has purchased numerous, military equipment from countries in NATO. For example, Colombia purchased a lot of LAV-3 units from the company General Dynamics, which is a Canadian company. So how important is Colombia's relationship with NATO and its member states in acquiring military equipment?
Yeah, thank you. Our doctrine and logistics, of course, are aligned with the Western Hemisphere, which is why prioritized purchases are generally from NATO countries. This alignment supports interoperability and cataloging processes. So for Colombia, as a global partner organization, this is achieved by generating more confidence among allied cooperating partners, and also to have a standardization of our processes. And that's why it is important, to enhance this purchases to the NATO countries. Because bilaterally, as I mentioned, we have a very strong relation, and we are, permanently in contact and also purchasing individually from countries like Canada, like the United States, and European countries. But also, if we go to the NATO as organization, we remain, that even now is, the main relation with some of them, but we can extend in the future our relations and purchases to other countries because they share also the standardization of these processes and the equipment. That's why it's strategic for Colombia to have this relationship with the organization.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like to follow up with you on your previous comments regarding the role of women in security and defense. Colombia and NATO agreed to an individually tailored partnership program that not only works towards improving Colombia's military for the challenges it faces, but also integrates more gendered perspectives in defense. How has Colombia worked with NATO to achieve these goals?
For the Colombian government, this line of cooperation is very, very important. And our Ministry of Defense has made significant efforts to comply with the recommendations of the United Nations Resolution 1325, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, recognizing the leading of the role of women within the public force and incorporating the gender approach into internal structure and mission in the territories. Within the framework of the relationship with NATO, Colombia has participated in gender focal point and gender officer courses and endorsed the Women, Peace and Security Policy in 2023 and is updated in January 2025. It was achieved by identifying the following common points that maybe to mention some of them, like the creation of a gender committee with the gender offices in each of the forces, strengthening communications with a gender perspective, participation of women, specifically in the planning of development operation, cooperation in strategic alliances with international organizations, data collection. This is another analysis and reporting. So Colombia is interested in including a dedicated line of cooperation for women, peace and security in the new cycle of individual tailored partnership program 2026-2029. This aims to deepen the relation with NATO and on this issue and share the experiences of the Colombian defense sector in gender mainstreaming. And on the other hand, I would like to mention that we continue not only in terms of the cooperation with NATO, but also in our foreign policy. Do you know we have our feminist gender policy in terms of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we are stressing the importance of the participation of women in peace negotiations and diplomacy. And it complements, of course, NATO, because NATO is not only an organization military, but also, as we mentioned at the beginning, also comprise many areas of exchanging information and exchanging good practices among our members.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And so Colombia has had an extensive experience in humanitarian and military mine clearance, as you mentioned previously. In 2019, the Colombia Training Center, Centro Internacional del Mando, became the 33rd member of the NATO Partnership Training Education Centers Network and has run several training courses for NATO personnel. Colombian experts have also trained Ukrainian soldiers in detecting and defusing mines. At the same time, Colombia is one of the most affected countries in anti-personnel landmines in the world. Ambassador, could you please elaborate on the importance of humanitarian demining for peace and security, and what steps from NATO member states are needed to ensure faster mine clearing in different regions of the world?
Let me also clarify, just for you, that Colombia has not trained Ukrainian soldiers. However, we are ready to support them in the post-conflict phase. But our crucial work is carried out mainly through the humanitarian demining brigade for the National Army. Unfortunately, Colombia is affected and is still being affected by personal mining in our territory because the threat they pose, criminal groups and also dissidents of FARC after signing the peace agreement. But our main objective is to guarantee the fundamental right to life and restore the legitimate use of land and communities participating in the reconstruction of the social fabric under the principles of humanity, neutrality, and impartiality. Those mines laid during the armed conflict continue to pose a significant danger, as I mentioned, and not only cause serious physical injuries, such as amputations, psychological damage. These issues affect access to basic services such as health and education, significantly impacting the inhabitants of the different regions in our territory. So that's why we have this International Demining Center, CIDES. CID is recognized as the 33rd Partnership Training and Education Center on the North Atlantic Treaty of the NATO, and it's interested in being accredited by the organization. But the process has been supported for many governments, especially Swedish Armed Forces International Center, and has been vital to PTC community, especially those centers with knowledge and experience in the process for cities to advance in the best and effective way in achieving the objective. The administration of President Petro has also given quite a strong importance in order to have this demining in our territory.
Thank you. So, Ambassador, on that point with the new administration of President Gustavo Petro, we've seen that he has proposed a paradigm shift towards a sort of human rights-based approach to security and crime. Now, this approach targets sort of underlying factors like violence, crime, and conflict, such as poverty, inequality, and lack of education. So compared to previous approaches that focused on military and law enforcement measures to combat armed insurgent groups and drug trafficking organizations, the new strategy seems to take a more holistic and people-centered approach. So, Ambassador, what key lessons from Colombia's security approach do you think can be shared with global partners to help better broaden security challenges effectively?
Thank you very much for that question and also your comments. As you're right, has said, there is a more balanced approach with this the Petro administration, with President Petro administration, regarding security in Colombia as in a holistic way, more integral, not only using, as you know, the military force, but also, of course, to bring to those communities along the territory with the services of the state in terms of economic development and also providing, health services for people, education. That is maybe I'm sure you know that unfortunately Colombia is one of the more unequal countries in the Western Hemisphere. And we have to tackle this problem with not only, putting security with arms, with the arms of the state, but also to provide them, the state's social services for people and the opportunities to have better lives for those communities. That's why our approach is that we try to overcome the armed conflict in Colombia with the peace process, and also to combine, policies and strategies, comprehensive strategies that with economic development progress in the most affected regions, ensuring a unified action of the state. Collaboration with local communities is essential to achieving lasting and sustainable peace. That's that Colombia considers, particularly the President Petro's government, the human security as a transformation of social for adaptation and risk mitigation. That it means, that we, of course, need life with legal and institutional security, but also economic and social framework in order to boost that kind of policy. This is this social protection system, physical and digital infrastructure for life and well-being, justice as goods and services is a comprehensive security and defense for our territories, communities, and populations.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So switch gears a tiny bit. So in the recent months, the US has imposed new tariffs on Canadian goods, as we all know. And we've been seeing a growing sentiment among Canadian consumers and businesses shifting away from American products. Given this changing landscape, how do you see Colombia positioning itself as a stronger economic partner to Canada? Are there any specific sectors such as energy, agriculture, even possibly food and beverage or technology, where Colombia is looking to expand trade with Canada?
I think, let me say that Colombia, if you allow me maybe I didn't hear the last part of your question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. The last part here, I'll just reiterate. It was, how do you see Colombia positioning itself as a stronger economic partner to Canada? Are there any specific sectors such as energy, agriculture, food and beverage? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
We have enjoyed a very, a strong relationship in terms of economic field with Canada. We signed in 2011 an FTA. That is a really wonderful tool in order to boost our bilateral trade, but also our investment currents from Canada, mostly from Canada to Colombia. This FTA now accounts for that our bilateral trade is almost more than $2 billion. This is a modest, of course, is modest, but in terms that we have this FTA, we can try to diversify the possibilities for Canada in the future, and also to increase the investment in Colombia. Now we have more than 120 Canadian companies in our territory, mostly the mining sector and also in the financial sector. We have the presence of this Canadian presence in the retail area. Also, we have the presence of the Canadian investors in our nation. So we are also looking in order to have a more diversified portfolio or market in terms of products that we are trying to introduce to the Canadians, because we have a quite big and varied offer of fruits, vegetables. Besides that, we are the main exporter of coffee to Canada, and cut flowers. We are also the first provider of cut flowers to Canada, as in the United States. And we still have quite low, but we used to export coal to Canada and other important. We are cocoa and also products. But The most important thing also is not continuing exporting on our trade base in commodities, but also how we can go further to another step in order to have a more add valued products in order to increase these commercial ties between Colombia and Canada. And of course, the investment. There is a lot of opportunities regarding, for example, Canada, since Colombia is member of the Pacific Alliance. That Pacific Alliance is a regional mechanism, comprises Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Peru. And practically, it's a free market group. We have signed free trade agreements among our countries, and it represents a huge opportunity for investment and to expand the trade bilateral ties between Canada and the region. Besides, of course, our bilateral relations that we have for trade, and also you have a very strong relation with Mexico, that is an important market, and Peru and Chile. But this is, ways that we can also try to expand and to boost our bilateral trade. On the other hand, let me mention that, Canadian consumers are so keen, for example, even to pay a premium for products when do you realize that those products come for people from zones that they are, displaced people in Colombia, or they are communities that they have, trying to overcome the violence, and they are looking for alternative products in order to export. So Canada is really, really sensitive in that issues for, paying more for products that they recognize that they are helping those communities to overcome the difficulties faced in our country.
Thank you, Ambassador. So for the last question that we have for the moderated panel, so Colombia is the fourth largest coffee bean producer in the world, and much of that coffee gets exported to NATO countries like the US, Canada, and Germany. Now, I think many people in this chat and watching online know that coffee is sort of a way of life for many people. It keeps them going, keeps them energized, and so there must be some sort of impact, not just to people's lives, but on the lives of people in defense when it comes to, decision making, the capabilities, when it comes to whether or not they have, good coffee, available in the morning. And so with coffee being such a vital commodity, what steps is Colombia taking to protect against, issues facing the coffee trade, such as climate change and other ecological problems that could pose a risk?
Thank you very much. As you know, we enjoy to have one of the best, I think the best coffee in the world. And of course, we must take care of that. And Colombia has been leading discussions, as you mentioned, on the care of the environment. We consider that there should be only one coordinated agenda, including pollution, climate change, and biodiversity protection. So we are determined to defend nature and life. The government of Colombia has shown its commitment recently during the COP16 on biodiversity with the launch of the Peace with Nature Coalition. So in every other fora, the discussion on that, it was agreed on that is the need of innovative mechanisms in order to finance the costs associated with prevention, mitigation, and adaptation measures to address climate change. This is intended also to successful allocation of quality resources, as well as support for the adaptation of innovative and climate and nature finance solutions. But I think what we must take care also is how we can advance in the reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in our territory. So that's why also we promote sectorial projects in energy, transport, and agriculture. Recently, the behavior of the market of coffee is being, really with the high prices in the international market. But this is due because the climate change, because the drought in Brazil means that in Colombia we can produce coffee with a high price. But the situation could reverse in the future, where we have a very bad weather in Colombia, means that this is a good for Brazilians, and I think it's unfair. That's why we must work with the community as a community as a whole in order to tackle, environmental threats that are, of course, affecting our commodities. And the other thing is our partnership with private sector and also with the government in order to enhance policies and to work together to have a better crops, better, expand markets for our products around the world, but also in order to know and to expand, as I mentioned, the offer of other agricultural products. But the most important is the transformation of our productive sector. So we need to advance into have a more technology and also possibilities to advance in other steps of our production in Colombia.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, for all your insights. We're now going to open the floor to questions from the live audience. So for people watching, please continue to share your questions in the chat. We've got many questions so far, so we'd like to get through them so we can address as many as possible. So I think I'll start with the first question that we received. So Ambassador, how does Colombia see its role evolving in the next decade when it comes to defense cooperation, both regionally and with NATO?
Could you repeat it, please? Sorry, at the beginning.
How does Colombia see its role evolving in the next decade when it comes to defense cooperation, both regionally and with NATO?
Okay. No, as I think Colombia until now has played an important role in Latin America. We are a medium-sized country in the region, but politically and economically important in order to tackle different challenges that not only the region, but also globally we are facing, as I mentioned before, regarding terror, counterterrorism, of drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and also in terms of digital threats that are affecting all countries. So I think the only way is that Colombia, with other nations, in a common effort, we can fight. And one of the institutions that we can also look in order to enhance and to be effective is the collaboration with the NATO organization in areas specifically as we mentioned during this session about how we expand and we exchange good practices between our institutions, armed forces, for respecting human rights, and also to improve the capabilities of our men and women in our armed forces.
Thank you. So this next question, I think it's pretty on theme. So this user asks, why do you think that Colombia is the only country in South America to be a NATO partner?
I think I don't know what is the decision of other countries, but we consider that, as I said before, we have enjoyed for many decades a very strong relationship with member countries of NATO individually. It means bilaterally, we have very strong relations with United States, Canada, countries in Europe, and around the globe, exchanging information. Also, we talk here about purchasing equipment and everything. But now I think Colombia, with experience in terms not only because we had an internal conflict during many, many years, gave us also the capabilities of our armed forces to deal with, the challenges that now other countries are facing right now. That's why we have quite experience and good practices and knowledge that also we consider we could share with other countries, not only in the region, as also talked here in the beginning of the session, like the Ocean Shield that we shared with NATO quite years ago. So we are open country as has been our tradition, like open economy, open policy, trying to reinforce our relations in foreign policy with all countries around the globe. And this is part, of our strategy in our relations internationally.
Thank you. And so on bilateral and international relationships, this user asks, from a geopolitical point of view, what is Colombia's strategy in regards to the growing presence and influence from China in South America?
In Colombia, for a long time, the presence of China has been quite important, of course, like in other countries in the region. But I think this is part, the strategy of the interests of other countries. We have diplomatic relations with that nations. We understand that this is a global power, it's a global partner, but also we have, we are pragmatically interested to have relations with all countries in terms of friendship, in terms of cooperation, and of course in our bilateral trade. So we are in the Western Hemisphere. We have the privilege to have this relation with countries in the Western part of the world. It doesn't mean that it doesn't imply that we cannot have other relations with other countries in other regions. But of course, I think our main relation is in our region. It means like Latin American countries, and then with the Western countries in the globe. So China has the totally right to expand relations in the region, but of course, as I mentioned, in Colombia it's important, but it is the same relation that we also have with other extraterritorial countries in Europe or in Africa, because also, for example, our strategy in foreign policy is try to enhance the relations with Africa, because it's a continent that offers a huge potentiality in many areas, and also why not in the future also to share our experience, because there are so many conflicts also in that continent that we could help and also try to render any cooperation with those countries in that continent.
And back to South America, this user asks, does Colombia's relationship with NATO affect any security dynamics in South and Central America? And furthermore, how does Colombia's relationship with Canada potentially impact this?
Not at all. I don't think there is any, impact in terms of security threats or instability in the region, because we are a global partner of NATO. Because our main goals in the relation with NATO is not particularly in terms of using the military, but potentially in a global threats around the globe, but not with another country or a specific region in terms of a military action, but also, as I mentioned, in exchange of practices, good knowledge, and to increase our capabilities for our armed forces and to enhance cooperation. That is, this is the most important, I think, achievement that we have pursued with the relation with NATO is that enhanced cooperation between the organization and Colombia.
And so this user asks, as Colombia's NATO partnership evolves, how might Canadian and Colombian defense cooperation expand? And what are some potential hurdles that you might see in the future?
Do you know Canada is a global also partner, is member of the G7 with a long tradition and participation in many international conflicts during the history. So there are so many areas that we can learn from Canada. Let me just talk about, for example, important as is Europe advance in terms of the gender equality. That has been quite an example for Colombia, but also how do you know you consider also the relation with the First Nations communities in Canada. That is also, do you know, good practices, good experiences in terms for Colombia, because also we have quite a number of that we call indigenous people, or that is also First Nations that is called here in Canada, where we can also share experiences, knowledge, and cooperation. But besides of that, this is the permanent communication and relation between our military forces with the Canadians in many areas. We have visitors from Colombia permanently from the armed forces to Canada, at the same time Canadians into Colombia. Our, do you know, tail ship, the Colombian tail ship Gloria, is coming almost every year to Canada. Last 2 years ago came to Halifax, and this year is coming to Vancouver, and it shows, do you know, this is a very fluent and cordial relations between our countries in the field of our defense forces.
Right. And so we got one question here. So what role does the Colombian diaspora in Canada play to foster stronger bilateral relations? So sort of the domestic Colombians here in Canada, what part do they play, you know?
Thank you. We have a big diaspora. I think it's the second in Latin America diaspora in Canada, more than roughly 120,000 Colombians across Canada, mostly in the province of Quebec and Ontario. But we have also a strong presence in other provinces like Alberta and British Columbia. And it's a multi-diverse diaspora. Let me say that we have here many Colombian refugees that they were received by the Canadian government, and they are here working in this country and looking for a new, do you know, economic and social conditions in Canada, and they are performing quite well. But also a quite strong students, a big number of students in different universities in Canada, in studying here, doing, of course, you know, courses, and also advancing in postgraduate programs. They are really a vibrant community, and this is surprisingly the very leading community, and we are very proud of them.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And one last question from me. How is the Colombian embassy working to strengthen cultural ties and awareness of Colombian heritage in Canada? And maybe there are some initiatives to promote Colombian culture and also student exchange programs between Colombia and Canada.
Thank you so much. Now we are do you know, talking about one of my favorite issues that I want to touch is regarding our cultural diversity and the presence here in Canada. And let me say that there is quite strong interest from the Canadian institutions to bring, you know, a group of dancers, orchestras, and we had 2 years ago the exhibition of the Gold Museum. That is the biggest, the most important gold museum around the world. That is in the central, the custody of the central bank in Colombia, and it was an exhibition in Montreal, in the Musée des Beaux-Arts, and it was for almost 3 months. It was a really good exhibition, and we have permanently in different festivals in Toronto or in British Columbia, or even the presence of groups in the Stampede in Alberta. And we are promoting, of course, all those artists in Quebec or in Montreal, here also in Ottawa, permanently trying to show how Colombia is in its richness in terms of expressions of music, literature. As you know, we have a very well-known Nobel Prize, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and to promote, do you know, though, Colombia in a better way in many manifestations of the arts.
Looks like that is all we have time for. We want to express our deepest gratitude and sincere thanks to you, Ambassador, for your responses and for your time. Muchísimas gracias. With that, I will now give the floor.
Thank you so much to you for this opportunity to talk not only, do you know, about NATO, because we went to a range of different issues. I appreciate also very much that. And let me just to thank again, but also to invite you to Colombia if you have the chance to go down there and to enjoy the beauty of our nation.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I will now give the floor to our Vice President of the NATO Association of Canada, Mike Ward, for some closing remarks.
Ambassador, just to add to what Elena was saying, just a fabulous presentation. Fascinating to hear about the diversity of your country, the leadership role that Colombia is playing in South America, the benefits that you're really a success story, and I know that you're active in outreach here in Canada. I know you were interviewed by the Hill Times not too long ago. You've had various roundtables with NGO groups in Canada, and of course you're part of this. The fact you spoke at Carleton University recently and you informed students and faculty about Colombia's role in NATO, and they weren't aware of it. This is all good, and it shows when we all work together, we can get the message out. And the benefits for NATO membership has increased the capabilities of our armed forces. It's increased the increasing role for Colombia in peacekeeping, and more generally, stronger bilateral ties with countries such as the United States, Canada. You mentioned Spain and many other countries. You talked about the importance of purchasing NATO equipment. It's not only in terms of compatibility between countries, but in terms of assured supply, and that's extremely important. It's a two-way street, though. Colombia looks like it's poised to share best practices in increasing security and awareness and approaches to security, which your government's implementing. Trade and investment. It was nice to hear the questions about trade and investment, where you reconfirmed the close ties with Canada through the FTA, through the Pacific Alliance as well, and this is a real good opportunity for you to, as you already know, of course, to talk to potential Canadian investors who are looking to expand, and not just in mining, but Canadian investors who are looking to expand their reach internationally into South America. So why not invest in Colombia through the FTA agreement, and then have access to the South American market through their investments in Colombia. So Canadians are looking for that. They're looking to say, how do we deal with what's happening right now with our partner to the south, Canada's partner to the south, and that's one strategy. So I imagine you're going to be busy talking to Canadians and getting them interested in investing. So it's just been a fascinating talk. I can't thank you enough. And I know that Elena is going to be posting a recording of this on the NATO Association website, so it'll be accessible to all of those that couldn't join us today. Thank you again.
No, thank you, Mr. Ward, and all of you are invited to come here to enjoy coffee. But since Mr. Mike Ward is here in Ottawa, you are most welcome to come here anytime you want it and to enjoy a cup of coffee, Colombian coffee.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I've ended the stream now.